In this lecture, we are going to continue our discussion about how to convert text into vectors using counting. At this point, we understand the basics of tokenizing a string into a list of words and then counting each word and putting those counts into a vector. But there are still a few details we need to explore. In this lecture, we are going to consider the concept of stopwords. So suppose that we did our word counting procedure as described. What do we think might happen? Well, let's consider some very common words that appear everywhere but do not necessarily carry a lot of information. Words like and, the, it, is, and so forth. What might happen if we counted these words? One thing to consider is whether or not these words are useful. Pretty much any text can contain these words, no matter what topic they are about, whether or not they are spam, whether or not they are positive or negative. So it could be said that these words don't carry useful information for whatever task we are doing. Here's another thing to consider. As you recall, increasing dimensionality is generally bad. This will be a common theme throughout this course, so don't worry if you don't understand everything there is to know about this right away. But just keep in mind that we prefer not to have very high dimensional vectors. One simple reason is that the larger they are, the more computation we have to do. More computation takes more time and more space. Here's another thing to consider. Putting high dimensionality aside, what about the fact that these words do not help us differentiate between different kinds of documents? Recall that one method we use to gain an understanding about vectors is their distance to each other. But if we make a vector that contains lots of ands, lots of thes, and lots of its, all the documents will look like similar vectors. The counts for these words will overshadow the counts for the other, possibly more important words, like mitochondria or voltage. So it may be useful to simply ignore these words altogether. We call this list of words that we want to ignore stopwords. Luckily, people have already thought about this issue, and thus, libraries like scikit-learn allow you to remove stopwords from the counting process automatically. So when you create your count vectorizer object, there is an argument called stopwords that allows you to specify the stopwords. By default, this is set to none, and so if you don't specify any stopwords, then they will be capped. There are two other possible options. The first is to pass in the string English. If you do this, there is a built-in list of stopwords in English that will be ignored. This is probably the easiest thing to do, but unfortunately it only covers English. The second option is to pass in a list of user-defined stopwords. So perhaps you're working in a different language, or you're working in a specific domain where the stopwords are not the same as they are for generic English documents. For example, you might be working in a business or an industry that uses very niche terms, but some of them are not important since they are used too commonly. In this case, you can specify your own stopword list. Now, if you want to do NLP in another language, one possibility is to use stopwords from NLTK. So here is some sample code to show you how to get a list of stopwords in other languages. The first step is to import NLTK. The next step, if you haven't already done so, is to call nltk.download, passing in the argument stopwords. This will download the stopwords for each language. The next step is to import the stopwords module. And at this point, you can call the words function, passing in your language of choice. So for example, you can pass in English, German, Spanish, and even Arabic. But note that not all languages are supported. To get a full list of languages, check the directory shown on this slide. If the language you want is not there, you may still be able to find a list of stopwords simply by doing a search.